Welcome to today's Pirkei Avot shir. Today we're going to be starting Bezrat Hashem, the third Perek, Mishna number 1, and we'd like to dedicate this shir as usual to Levy and Moshe Esther and Elisheva Yael bat Levy, and also to a very special woman, Esther Malka bat Eliyahu Mordechai. And without any further ado, we'll hand over to Michael.
Thank you, Rav Mashiach. So this Mishnah is the beginning of the third Perek, the first Mishnah. We are introduced to Rabbi Akavia ben Mahalalel. And perhaps we should give Rav Akavia ben Mahalalel a brief biography and a description of his life and what he was famous for. So he was around at the second Tanaic generation, in between the first and second centuries, and nothing much is known of his earlier history. There aren't any references to his teachers, and not many of his sayings have been preserved. The Mishnah portrays him as a man who fearlessly and persistently maintained opinions on certain halachot, even in cases where different traditions were held by the majority of his colleagues, because those opinions were founded on traditions he had received from his predecessors. On one occasion, the majority demanded that he renounce his divergent opinions, but he refused. It was even intimated to him that in the event of his compliance, he would be elevated to the position of Av Beis Din, which is like the president of the Sanhedrin. But Akavia rejected the proposition, remarking, and I quote, "I would rather be called a fool all my lifetime than be a sinner for one moment." So this shows what a ethical and moral man he was, that he would refuse honors in exchange for changing his ethical and religious opinions, which is very, very interesting. His burial location is in Kfar Manda in the Lower Galilee. What else? One characteristic of Rav Akavia was the great stress he laid on personal merit. On his deathbed, he was requested by his son to recommend him to their sages. I give him a kind of leg up in the rabbinical world, but he declined to do so. His son inquired whether his father had discovered him in any trait which rendered him unworthy of such recommendation, and his father's reply was, "No, but your own deeds will make you welcome. Of your own deeds will make you obnoxious." So he's saying, look, you'll get in by yourself. You're capable of it, but you have to put the ishtaglut in. Mm-hmm. As to sort of Akavia's place in history, the scholars are divided. Some place him in the Patriarchate of Hillel I, which was 30 BC to 10 of the current era, and even somewhat earlier, but others bring him down to the first Tanaic generation. Still others believe that he flourished during the times of Gamliel, or Gamliel II. The circumstances and scholastic achievements of the second Tanaic generation render Akavia's excommunication more reasonable. The decree of excommunication failed to obscure Akavia's merited fame, for his name reached subsequent generations surrounded by such a halo of glory as to throw doubt on the decree himself. So what does this, what was this excommunication? Basically, in the course of the discussion on the halacha concerning the administration of the, in quotes, water of jealousy, Akavia declared that if the subject of the test was not of a free-born Jewess, the test water was not to be administered, while the majority declared a proselyte or an emancipated slave to be the equal of a free-born daughter of Israel. In support of their view, the majority cited a case in point where the former associate presidents of the Sanhedrin, Shemaiah and Avtalion, had the test made on a freed woman, whereupon Akavia disdainfully exclaimed, Dugma Hishkua. This might mean, and I quote, to one like themselves they gave to drink. End quote, and may be constructed as an allusion to an old rumour to the effects that these associate presidents were themselves Lilian descendants of proselytes. Or it might mean, and I quote, they gave her a sham to drink. So basically the memory of this saying towards those chiefs who were held in high esteem, this insinuation gave great offence. And the sentence of nidui, which was isolation or excommunication, was passed to him. This he bore to the end of his days rather than to violate his convictions. However, before his death, he admonished his son to submit to the views of the majority, even in the cases where he himself had shown such persistent opposition. His son, expressing surprise at so apparent an inconsistency, his father replied, I have received my tradition from a majority of the school of my days, and so have my opponents. I was bound to conform to the tradition I had received, and so are they bound to their tradition. But you have heard the traditions from both myself and from my opponents, from a minority and from a majority. And it is proper for you to reject the opinions of the individual and adopt the views of the majority. So he kind of gave his son a reason to follow the normative law of following the majority, as opposed to him who had kind of took it upon himself to resist the normative views. So let's look at a couple of his teachings. What he said. He said, let's start with the Mishna, because that's the most famous of his, one of the most famous of his teachings. So, Akavia ben Mahalalel Omer, Histadkel b'shlosha devarim, v'iyata ba lidei avera, da ma'ayin ma'at, Vata, Ola'an ata holech. Abaya ben Mahalalel said, mark well these three things, and you will not come into the power of sin. Know where you came from, Ola'an ata holech, and where you are going. Olifnei mi'ata atid liten din b'cheshbon, and before whom you are destined to give an account and reckoning. Me'ayin bata, where did you come? Me'tipa tzucha, a putrid drop. Ola'an ata olech, and where are you going? Limkom afar rima v'tole'a, to a place of dust, worms, and maggots. Olifnei mi'ata atid, and before whom will you give a reckoning? Leten din v'cheshbon, who will you give a reckoning calculation? Lifnei melech malchayim lachem hakadosh baruch hu, before King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. So he is telling you, basic. Well, Rambam puts it the best way. Rambam says, this perusal, this whole concept of know what you came from and where you're going, and value the time in between, Rambam says, and I quote, this perusal brings a person to humility in remembering from where he came. And this perusal, his perusal of his end, will bring him to disparage matters of the world. And his perusal of the greatness of Hashem will bring him to be quick to listen to his commandments. And when these three come into his hand, he will not sin at all. So, let's look at some more commentaries regarding the beginning, the histakel b'shlosha dorim, mark well or focus on three things. Rab Chaim of Volozhin says regarding this, focus on these three things. He says, focus on these things before desire strikes, for it is very difficult to conjure up images of reverence and fear of punishment while under the spell of desire. This was discussed in Avot, chapter 2, verse Mishna 1. You must act like a soldier on the front line who never lets down his guard. Even when he is eating or sleeping, his mind is still on the battle. So too, you must never let down your guard against the evil inclination. Always be prepared for an attack by constantly reinforcing your reverence of Hashem. Also, the word da'ah. The word da'ah, know, is apparently extraneous. It serves to reinforce the lesson, to teach us the need to meditate on these ideas. When a student hears a lesson from his master, he will not immediately attain full clarity. He must sift through the lesson, clarifying the ideas before he can finally understand his master's intent. This is also true with the words of rebuke, such as it says in Hosea 14:3, take counsel amongst yourselves and return to Hashem. After hearing the rebuke of the prophet, discuss it amongst yourselves, then you will return to Hashem. So give these sayings thoughts and distill them, and the message will become clear. And also we learn in Mishle 2:4-5, if you seek it like silver and dig for it like treasure, then you will understand the reverence of Hashem and find Hashem's knowledge. Rav Chaim continues to say, a treasure seeker will first consult his map to find the area where the prize is buried. Then he will sift through every grain of sand, every clod of earth, to make certain that he has not missed a precious gem. Similarly, the student will seek a master who will then teach him a lesson, one indicating where the treasure may be found. The student will then dig through the lesson, unearthing all the pearls of wisdom which are hidden in his master's words. It is not sufficient to merely hear the idea from a kavya. You must know it, or you must know it, and you must embellish it, and you must embellish the theme on your own. Only then can you truly retain it. So that's very interesting to his concept of know three things, or focus on three things. And then we talk about where you came from. Rab Chaim says, it says where you came from, where you are, and where you are going. So he says there are three tenses, past, present, and future. Man may merit great things based on the events of any of these three times. For example, Egyptian converts can eventually marry into the Jewish nation because of the Egyptian nation sheltered Yaakov and his family during the great time. We learn this in Devarim 23:8. Yishmael also was miraculously saved because of his momentary righteousness. Hashem spared him in spite of the fact that he would later become wicked. This we learn in Rosh Hashanah 16 Amud Beis on Bereshis 21:17. Furthermore, Ammon and Moab were spared destruction because future converts from those nations would serve an important role in the founding of the Jewish monarchy. We learn that in Baba Kama. However, we must not lose sight of the reality of these time frames. Our past is like a putrid drop, as this kind of seed of life it refers to. As the day passes, it dies. It is irretrievable, and the future holds the awesome reckoning before Hashem. And what does it mean by a putrid drop? He gives an analogy of Chaim. He says, a king cleared a huge garbage dump and built there a beautiful palace. Nobody dared to mention the history of the place in the king's presence, for it would be an embarrassment to admit that the imperial palace stood on the former grounds of a garbage dump. For this very reason, we are forbidden to speculate on what existed before the creation of the universe. This is from Chagiga 11b. Nevertheless, we should not refrain from discussing our own ignoble past, for this will aid us in avoiding sin. And furthermore, it says that we are headed towards a place of dust, worms, and maggots when we die. Rabbi Chaim of Volodin comments on this. Invertebrates do not live more than 12 months. We learn this in Chulin 58a. The densest coals cannot burn for more than 12 months. We learn that in Bava Basra 74b. Therefore, the punishment of most sinners does not last more than 12 months. We learn that in Shabbos 33a. By then, the worms and fires are no longer effective in regards to great sinners, however. In regard to great sinners, however, their worms will not die and their fire will not extinguish. We learn that in Yeshayahu 66:24. The fire is theirs, the product of their own action. The worms are theirs, those of a vertebrate. Therefore, their punishment is eternal. This is in regard to great sinners. And now, talking about this, so know where you come from, where you are going, and before whom you are destined to give an account and reckoning. Again, Rav Chaim comments on this, about this reckoning and calculation. The king distributed royal raiments to his servants. The intelligent ones folded the cloaks and stored them in a safe place. The foolish ones wore the clothing while going about their work. After a while, the king ordered that the cloaks be returned. The intelligent ones returned clean and pressed clothing, while the foolish ones returned soiled clothing. The king placed the clean clothing in a safe place and washed the dirty clothing. Hashem takes the clean royal cloaks, the souls of the righteous, and stores them under his throne. The dirty souls of the sinners, however, must undergo a cleansing process in Gehinnom. So here he's referring to our, I think it's called Levush Yamim, our robes of days, which are our souls, that either you can make them beautiful and multicolored and, through your deeds, or they have to be put in the washing machine. Yeah. He continues, it is significant that the intelligent servants in the parable did not merely return clean and unsullied garments. They improved the garments by pressing them. By the same token, we have a dual responsibility for our royal raiment, our soul. We must avoid staining it with sin, and we must improve it by performing the positive mitzvahs. When we stand before Hashem, we will have to justify any stain upon our souls. We shall also provide an accounting if we have improved our souls to the measure of our capabilities. The body comes from a single drop and eventually rots into the grave. It is the immortal soul which remains in order to give a reckoning before Hashem. If you recognize that only the soul has any permanence, you will be inspired by to pursue spiritual perfection. As the Rabbanim says in Tana Devei Eliyahu, chapter 25, a man must always say, when will my deeds emulate the deeds of the patriarchs?
Wow, okay. I always wondered about that phrase, when will my deeds emulate the deeds of the patriarchs? Because let's face it, it's highly unlikely a person would get to that level, but it doesn't mean you have to match them. First of all, because you have to understand that whatever you do in your generation is relative, or with our generation, I should say, it's relative. So a person could be performing mitzvot that maybe in Avram, Yitzchak and Yaakov's generation might not, be no great shakes, nothing to do. But in our generation, with all that's going on in the world, each one of us could be shining lights like Avram, Yitzchak and Yaakov. What a beautiful idea, Michael.
And just one final commentary on this, to give a reckoning, is from Tosfot Yom Tov, which says regarding that, while the word din can refer to the judgment or verdict at the end of the case, here it refers to the opening of the case, which is why din, the opening of the case, precedes cheshbon, the accounting. This explains the wording latent din of the Mishna, to cause a din. Since a case must be opened whenever one sins, one can be said to cause the case. But this is very interesting. I want to add something to that. It also, the fact that it's a din and then cheshbon indicates the power of teshuvah. There's a case, you may have committed a sin, but it's a pending case. Yeah. There's a din, and you have the chance before judgment to do teshuvah, and you're given that extra option to renounce your sin and to do vidua and teshuvah, and before cheshbon is demanded. Wow. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's a big chesed from Hashem. Wow, fantastic. Thank you so much. Very interesting insights there to open up the third perek. And next time we convene, we'll do the second Mishna, which is Rabbi Chanina Sagan HaKohanim. But until then, we wish you a wonderful and blessed week. Take care.